Wonderful. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Brianna Burnell. She is CEO of Pure Strategy. The reason we invited Brianna to Immersed is we, of course, wanted to talk about artificial intelligence, and we were really excited to hear about applications of artificial intelligence, AI in action, and it's the fruitful stories that are really going to drive the industry forward. So let's give a round of applause to Brianna.
Awesome, thank you. So when we talk about AI, it's interesting because AI has such a long history in technology, and so this is not the first time that we've seen a big rise in AI. But there is something that's interesting and a little bit different about what's happening in artificial intelligence now as compared to some of the things that we've seen in history. So what precipitated the rise of AI in this iteration? And I think there are three main areas that have driven this. So first we have these data sets that are available that have never before been possible. So, it's possible for me to get a data set that's millions or even billions of rows publicly available in order to do some of this analysis. Coupled with faster computing, we're able to actually do some of these methods that may have been too computationally expensive before. And then finally, new methods. So, it's hard to keep up with some of the new methods that are coming out of both academic institutions as well as companies. So I'm excited to see many different companies in the AI area who are contributing to the body of knowledge. And instead of just publishing them as a research paper or something like that, what we're seeing is these companies are actually making these methods available to everyone. So all of these factors together has made it a really exciting time in AI right now. But unfortunately, in most businesses, I wouldn't call it excitement about AI within the organization. Most businesses right now have an overwhelming feeling of data anxiety. So instead of being excited about all of these new opportunities with their data, there's this feeling of anxiety that the important information that's in the data is ignored, not acted upon, and just generally that money is being wasted. And the way that data anxiety manifests itself in organizations depends a lot on the organization. So these are three sort of ways that the symptoms of data anxiety I've seen so far. So some companies, so these are generally the companies who believe themselves to be quite innovative, they're trying to reinvent themselves, and they want to try new AI technology. They want to get on board, they want to try something. But unfortunately, what happens is they will try many, many new things, and it'll lead them to be essentially scattered. So many of the new projects that are being taken on are misaligned with what the corporate priorities are, and all of the projects that they're doing tend to be under-resourced. So it's sort of like you're trying to chase the laser pointer of your cat, and it ends up making the company very scattered and unable to move forward. Another way is indecisiveness. So we've heard about analysis paralysis for many years, and this indecisiveness can permeate an organization where they have access to more and more information, but are unsure how to use it for their decision making. So it's conflicting priorities. We see committee upon committee that has too much deliberation, and it makes these companies very indecisive. And then finally, slowness. So this is different from indecisiveness in that in a slow company, you have the information that's coming in, and it's largely ignored in favor of the status quo. So the company wants to rely on the things that have worked before, and instead of updating their systems to be able to take into account new technology, they're instead ignoring most of the information. And despite all the talk about wanting to have really great customer experience, most companies actually have very weak customer experience programs. So if you went to the CEO of just about any company in any industry and you asked them how important is customer experience, they would probably rate it in one of the top 3 priorities for their organization. We even heard yesterday, that there's a focus in customer experience across many organizations that are here today. But unfortunately, most companies have weak customer experience programs, and all of those symptoms of data anxiety are contributing to the reason that they have such weak programs. So things like lack of taking action based on customer experience metrics, limited visibility in the organization. So if you have information that's not traveling to the right people in the right organization, then you have a problem with providing a good customer experience. And then finally, lack of resources for tracking some of these CX metrics. So you're not driving actions, visibility is poor, and you're under-resourced. And this is an even bigger problem because there's been so many changes in the last decade to business. So things like the pace of change and disruption has affected almost every industry. Customer expectations are rising. We're seeing individuals who have very, very little brand loyalty anymore, and expectations are really just rising. Every company is a tech company, so has anybody actually heard this phrase before? No one, okay. So this is an interesting one because a lot of companies who are in traditional industries are starting to realize that without having a tech component to their core offering, that they're falling behind and they're vulnerable to competitors. So having that tech quality within the organization is becoming more and more important. Social media and public grievances. So a lot of people are talking about products online. There's more and more data and information about product quality and that kind of thing. So we're seeing the rise of people being able to be very public about their grievances of the company. And finally, the decline of mass market. So this is both in marketing as well as in product design. So whereas before some of the designs were targeted towards a large swath of consumers, we're seeing now a lot more niche targeting, both with marketing and with product design. But unfortunately, not unfortunately anymore, AI can give a lot of help in these different areas. So when we look at the pace of change and some of the problems that companies are facing in this area, AI can provide faster insight and faster decision making. So if you're looking at a lot of data that's coming into your organization, instead of having humans compiling it, categorizing it, putting it to the format that they need, we're able to quickly do this with AI and machine learning. Not only that, but being flexible in how you're collecting data from all of these areas. So from your customers, you can quickly identify some of the warning signs of, say, dissatisfaction. You can intervene. So a lot of these things are made possible by the speed at which we can work with these technologies. As far as rising customer expectations, the real promise of AI and machine learning in this area is to be able to give that depth of insight. In being able to cross-pollinate some of these data sources with additional information, then we can get a much richer picture of customer behavior, what their attitudes are, what their buying behavior is. So even if you as a company are not directly collecting some of these things, we're able to augment the data that you are collecting to give that greater depth of insight. And being able to have a deeper understanding of the motivational factors on why individuals are making specific purchase decisions will help you figure out how to market to them. This, I think, is one of my favorite areas in AI right now, is the idea that you can have a company in a traditional industry where you have a machine learning or AI mechanism to be able to do a better job of delivering your product. So even if it's an industry, say like food and beverage, where there wasn't traditionally a huge tech component to it, now we're able to say recommend products to individuals who might be interested in. We can explore complementary offerings, and we can figure out how to expand the products in this way. As far as social media goes, I think for a lot of companies, this is a really overwhelming area, especially if you have a lot of customers, if you have a large market share. Being able to directly interact with customers is extremely important. However, interacting with customers in a way that is effectively moving your business forward can sometimes be a challenge. So how do you sift through all of that information, provide a quick action to those customers who need it? So the other sort of flip side of this is when you have a customer interaction that maybe doesn't need a person to be in charge of it, there are a lot of AI tools now that are available to sort of mimic how a human would interact with a customer for those times where it's not necessary for it to be a real customer service rep. So, for example, if I often add a travel package to my phone when I travel. And then so I'm talking with someone to add that service. Well, that doesn't need to be a human. Most of that can be done with a chatbot or an AI. So it frees up the time to focus on the customers where you need that extra special touch to be able to deal with that. And then finally, when we're talking about the decline of the mass market advertising, one of the areas that I think is really exciting in artificial intelligence is the idea of being able to mass personalize something. So most of the time, most companies will look at their customers in some kind of a segmentation where you have, let's say, 4 to 6 target groups, and I think we saw one yesterday even. So this is sort of how the marketing team often will think of it. This is how you're buying media. This is a way to make many different decisions as far as how the advertising budget is spent. However, now we're able to expand the number of niche target groups and actually target them individually. So we can, instead of relying on, say, 4 to 6 really large target segments, we can split them up and have a really deep understanding of why they buy, why they're your customers, and how you can make them have the best customer experience. So how to make it work? Well, I would say that doing an AI project is an interesting thing because the technology is very new and there are a lot of areas where it can apply. So the way that I've seen it succeed the best is to start with something small and kind of more simple, and then work your way up. So starting with too large of a project or too ambitious of a project from the get-go is often a real challenge to get that extra buy-in, and especially to get that budget when you've not proven that it works. So you're going to need to expect some of those surprises. Sometimes we have situations where there are unexpected things that happen, and you need to be able to take that into account as you're working on it. Bringing in expertise. I think for a lot of companies, it's very challenging to be able to find the right people to sort of manage these kinds of projects. So sometimes it means bringing in a consultant company. Sometimes it means hiring a group within the organization. Sometimes it means reorienting a group within the organization to be able to be working on this. So as long as you know that you can find the expertise, then I think that that's a way to set yourself up for success. So I put this here because as a tech person, I'm the kind of person that wants to focus all of my time in stage 4, which is the actual execution of the project. But the most successful projects are always the ones where there are a lot of other things happening around it that is what makes it successful. So I have 2 stages here, which is about socializing the project itself and socializing the results. The most successful projects are the ones where you have that buy-in and feedback continuously throughout the project. So without doing that, it doesn't matter how good your project is, how great the analytics are, how perfectly you've tuned the hyperparameters. Any of those things will not make a difference if you're not effectively socializing it with the right people to get their buy-in so that they understand what to do next. So if you're just starting on doing any kind of analytics project, I think that the first place to start is just looking at, what your data says, what is there. So what is true as far as the description goes. And then when you want to increase your sophistication, the sort of gold standard is that prescription there on the bottom right. So what should we do? So anything that moves you towards that direction is going to be a positive step in increasing your sophistication. So starting out with a description of what is true in the data now, often that's all you need to make many different decisions. But as you build the infrastructure around that analytics area of your organization, then you can increase your sophistication and have the decision-making mechanism connected with that. And so the most successful companies who do this really well, they're in that prescription part. They are doing an analytics project and they know directly what they're going to do with the results. So don't worry if you're not there yet, because the first place to start is just looking at it and starting to understand how you would get there. So what's next in AI? Some of these things, I think if you would have asked me, let's say 2 years ago, what are going to be the next big things in AI, many of these things would not have been on the list. The first one being returning to classic frameworks. So this has been a really interesting area that for a long time, in my career, the focus has been on machine learning and then sort of worked towards deep learning, and people almost ignored what had happened before. But we're seeing a lot of returning to some of the classic frameworks that were created in the 50s in order to understand how data is related to each other. So it's almost like we're looping back to things that happened, before my time, to be able to understand the way that the data relates to each other in a more sophisticated way. The second one is explainable AI, or XAI. So what's interesting about explainable AI is one of the mantras that I always had was clients hate a black box. And anyone who works in a consulting firm has probably heard that. The idea being that you want to be able to kind of pull apart the layers and be able to understand and validate that metric. But the way that machine learning kind of went was to almost obscure it so that it was more complicated and it was very challenging to explain how it works. So we're seeing now a return to explainable AI. Some of it is AI that explains itself, which I think is really exciting. Some of it is just making sure that you're allocating the proper amount of time to be able to explain the results of what you're building. So emergence is something that I've believed in for a long time, but right now it's starting to become more and more important because you're seeing the ability to have large amounts of data and finding emergent patterns in it. So things that you're not necessarily looking for. Most AI right now is focused on sort of a specific narrow prediction mechanism. But emergence is sort of a different way of thinking about it, a way to discover things that you're not looking for. And so I think that that's an exciting, paradigm-shifting way of thinking about AI, in a way that I think a lot of people can see that it can make a huge jump in their success. And then finally, standardization. So standardization, AI has resisted standardization for a while. Their standardization is extremely important in so many different areas. And now the conversation about standards within AI is becoming more and more important. So part of that has to do with data privacy legislation. Part of that has to do with the standards in the other industries that AI systems are close to. And some of it has to do with ethics and governance. So ethics is becoming more and more important in the AI field. And so having standards that govern that is becoming more and more important. But overall, I think that the promise of AI is to be able to help your organization see a better path forward and be able to action on some of the information that you already have. Thank you.
How about, would you like to take a question before
Sure,
we go on to the
yeah.
next presenter? Would anyone like to ask a question? I'll ask a question, or I'll ask you to do.
Yeah. Okay.
You brought up about ethics, so what do you think
Oh,
is
yeah.
limiting ethics? If you could name one ethics issue, because I know there's probably more than one, what ethics issue would be the priority for artificial intelligence?
I think autonomous weapons is a really important area, really interesting area. And there's a lot of countries that have started looking at how that should be governed within their own defense budget. That would be one. Ethics in like self-driving cars is a very challenging one. There's been a lot of work done in that specifically, but I think, in my personal opinion, it's definitely in weaponized AI, which I didn't talk about at all. But
So one more question for you. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, just following on that question, you talked about Stuxnet type.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Stuxnet.
I'm sorry.
Skynet, is that what you're thinking of?
Stuxnet.
Stux?
Yeah, the virus Stuxnet, the weapon that the CIA, the American government developed, stuck into Iran's.
You did with the centrifuge?
So that could be part of it. That wasn't what I was thinking of.
Yeah.
What I was,
drones, the weaponized drones you were thinking of?
yes.